The Ladakh border remains tense after India successfully blocked China's attempts to seize control of the southern bank of the Pangong Tso Lake. A third round of talks between military commanders is underway. Popular mobile phone game PUBG is among the 118 apps banned by the government, citing national security amid border tensions with China. Nearly 200 apps have been banned in the last couple of months. Over 78,000 COVID-19 cases in 24 hours take the active case in India over 8 lakh. Delhi reports over 2,500 cases, the biggest spike in nearly 2 months. The overall death toll near 66,500. The KV Kamath panel tasked with suggesting who qualifies for the RBI's loan recast program and based on what parameters likely to submit its report this week. Meanwhile, builders demand an extension of the moratorium and interest waiver before the Supreme Court. The case will be heard tomorrow again. States voiced their opinion on the options proposed by the centre to meet its GST compensation obligations. Kerala's Chief Minister writes to the PMO saying the centre's burden cannot be transferred to states. West Bengal calls the proposals a travesty and a betrayal of trust. Karnataka says it is open to borrowing to bridge the compensation shortfall. In a bid to boost manufacturing, the Niti Aayog is likely to move cabinet for an umbrella policy combining production-linked incentive scheme and the phased manufacturing program. Power distribution companies owe generation and transmission companies over 2.6 lakh crore rupees as of June this year. Sources say discoms are likely to seek 1.2 lakh crores in liquidity assistance this year. Adds the Power Ministry may soon move a cabinet note over a reform-based incentive scheme for discoms. The first audit report of the PM Cares Fund shows that it received over 3,000 crore rupees as contributions during the first 5 days of being set up. However, the report does not reveal the names of the donors. Opposition parties criticized the government's decision to scrap question hour during the monsoon session of Parliament. Congress MP Shashi Tharoor accuses the government of seeking to reduce Parliament to a notice board. TMC's Derek O'Brien says the government is using the pandemic as an excuse to murder democracy. Facebook India chief Ajit Mohan appears before the parliamentary panel on information technology. The panel had called representatives of Facebook to hear their views on prevention of misuse of social media platforms and safeguarding the rights of citizens. Good evening. Thanks very much for joining us on India Business Hour. I'm Shereen Bhan. We've got a packed show lined up for you. The top story tonight, the Ladakh border remains tense. India and China are locked in a standoff at the southern bank of the Pangong Lake. Sources say India dominates the area and both troops are within 1,000 meters of each other. Military-level talks have been underway for the last couple of days, but no headway has been made so far. In a statement released yesterday, India said that China made provocative military maneuvers on the 29th and 30th of August. After this, India was forced to undertake defensive measures along the line of actual control. On the other hand, China accuses India of illegally crossing the border and undermining its territorial sovereignty. Parikshit Luthra standing by now with the latest on the standoff. Parikshit, where do things stand with the dialogue as well as the situation at the LAC?
The south bank of Pangong Tso is the area where fresh confrontation between Indian and Chinese troops is taking place for the last 3 days or so. Let's just give you a sense of the area where this standoff is underway in eastern Ladakh. Now, this is a satellite image that we sourced from Det Resfa, a satellite imagery analyst who has been following the India-China confrontation at the LAC. This is the southern bank of Pangong Tso. Here you have Chinese observation posts, Chinese camps in the area. What China attempted to do on the night of 29th August was to close in its troops on Indian territory on the southern bank of Pangong Tso, areas which are under India's control, areas which belong to India. But that attempt was thwarted off on 29th night by Indian forces. They came up with strong preemptive measures. They're now dominating this area as well. What is important that on the 31st of August, when the two sides were having brigade commander level talks, China made another attempt to transgress this area, close in on Indian positions, but they were warned and warded off by Indian forces as well. Now, India has lodged a strong protest with the Chinese via military and diplomatic channels, asking them not to indulge in any provocative maneuvers at the LAC. Let's tell you more about the topography of this area. This is the famous Pangong So Lake. It has been a tourist spot as well. We are seeing a lot of friction here between Indian and Chinese troops for the last 4 months or so. The Chinese troops are not budging from this area, and they have tried to occupy more Indian positions, especially between Spangur So, this gap that you see here, and Chushul. Chushul is on the Indian side, and there was an attempt to dominate the territory between this region. This was an attempt by the Chinese forces, which India was able to repel rather successfully. India is now dominating this region once again. This was our territory. We managed to defend it and send a strong message to the Chinese as well. This is what Indian government sources are telling us. Let's tell you more. This satellite image that we have shows you the topography of this area. This was the area where Chinese troops wanted to set up and establish a new military post, but the Indian side was successful in pushing them back as well. On the ground, you have Indian and Chinese troops locked in a tense standoff. They are within firing range of each other. This is what our sources in the Indian military and the security establishment are telling us. They're about 1,000 meters from each other. So far, the military talks have been inconclusive. We would need more negotiations, but things on the ground stay as it is. Not much has changed over the last 3 days or so. India, we believe, has also increased deployment along other areas in Pangong So, especially in northern Pangong, as a precautionary measure. With that, it's back to you.
All right, Parikshit, many thanks for joining us. That is the latest. The situation at the LAC continues to be tense. No headway in the dialogue between both sides. Now, the government today has blocked another 118 mobile applications, including the popular app PUBG, on the grounds of these being prejudicial to India's sovereignty, integrity and security. Now, this comes days after reports of fresh tensions between India and China at the line of actual control, as Parikshit was just pointing out. My colleague Ashmit Kumar is standing by now to tell us more about the government's latest app ban list. Ashmit, 118 apps.
Well, this is clearly round 3 of the government's app ban offensive. Now, let's keep in mind that the one word that's conspicuous by its absence in the government release is the word China or the word Chinese. But the intent of the government is not to be mistaken. The intent of the government is quite clear. Let's take a look. On June 29th, we had 59 apps banned. That's the time TikTok had been banned. On July 24th, we saw an additional 15. And this time on September 2nd, we have 118 apps being banned. The chief amongst them, of course, this is one application that does not need an introduction in urban India. At least PUBG. That is the big takeaway here amongst the 118. That's the big app. But that's not the only one. There are 117 others. VPN, Baidu, LiveU, Carom Friends. Games, a lot of games being targeted. Ludo All-Star being targeted as a part of this offensive. Again, it's been done under Section 69 of the IT Act. What is the government's rationale? Well, the government says that they have been receiving reports and complaints even from the Home Ministry, which suggested that these apps were indulging in activities prejudicial to the country's security, sovereignty, defense and public order. They also said that the government, that MeitY had in fact reviewed complaints that they were in fact mining data, that they were collecting data, they were surreptitiously transmitting this data to servers that were beyond Indian borders, and that they were being mined and processed by elements that were hostile to the interests of the country, and that acting in this fashion was critical for protecting the interests of India's citizens, India's digital users. So clearly, the government's app ban offensive continues. This is, of course, round 3. The intent of the government being made clear. Back to you.
These apps could have been used by the Chinese government to harm Indian users, to harm Indian citizens, to harm Indian infrastructure, potentially through DDoS attacks, if possible. China's laws allow the government to exert control over the companies, and they can force these companies to move against India in some shape or form. It's an adversary. It is a risk for Indian citizens and Indian infrastructure. Okay. And I think the government's done the right thing.
The data is the new oil, and that's what the government has been really putting forward its views, and the different applications that were banned in the first round, and now 118 apps today. It really states that data is very important, and what government feels that many of these data actually were being leaked out, and data was being stored in the foreign land, and then this data was being misused.
Well, reactions coming into the latest government offensive against 118 apps. Here's the latest on coronavirus. Over 78,000 cases in the last 24 hours have taken the total confirmed infections in India to over 37 lakh. Active cases now stand at over 8 lakh with over 29 lakh recoveries. Death toll is now closer to 66,500 after more than 1,000 deaths were reported in the last 24 hours. That's to 8 a.m. this morning. Maharashtra remains the worst hit state with nearly 16,000 cases being added in the last 24 hours. Andhra Pradesh has also consistently been reporting over 10,000 daily cases, followed by Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. Delhi has seen a spike in cases with 2,500 infections being reported in the last 24 hours. This is the biggest surge that Delhi has seen in the last 2 months. Well, some of the other COVID-related headlines. Goa's Chief Minister Pramod Sawant has tested positive. He is asymptomatic and currently under home isolation. The Health Ministry has released FAQs on clinical management of COVID-19 patients in ICU. The information collated by AIIMS skips Biocon's itolizumab as a treatment option. It says that tocilizumab is an experimental therapy and should be used only in patients with cytokine syndrome after ruling out active infections. The document recommends that saturation should be strictly monitored in patients with prior comorbidities like coronary artery disease or chronic lung disease to avoid sudden death. AIIMS Delhi has temporarily suspended its outpatient department, says it is doing so to optimize the usage of beds for hospitalization of emergency and semi-emergency patients. Union Minister Hardeep Singh Puri says metro services will be resumed in a staggered manner with fewer trains initially to avoid overcrowding. Adds that only asymptomatic passengers will be allowed to travel after thermal screening. Delhi Metro decides to resume operations on the 7th of this month. Maharashtra government not to resume metro and monorail services in September.
The operations are being resumed in a graded manner. I emphasize graded manner. Those metro systems which have more than one line will open different lines starting from 7th September. The frequency of trains will also need to be regulated to avoid passenger overcrowding. It goes without saying that only asymptomatic persons will be allowed to travel after thermal screening at entry into the stations.
Well, that's Hardeep Puri. Civil Aviation Ministry has allowed domestic airlines to operate with 60% capacity with immediate effect versus 45% earlier. Sources say the ministry has allowed airlines to operate with increased capacity after the review of current flight operations. That's a cnbc TV 18 exclusive. The KV Kamath panel tasked with suggesting who qualifies for the RBI's loan recast program and based on what parameters likely to submit its report this week. Meanwhile, builders demand an extension of the moratorium and interest waiver before the Supreme Court. The case will be heard tomorrow again. The list of states opposing the centre's plan, asking them to borrow directly and bridge the GST compensation shortfall, is growing. But we also have the first major state supporting the centre's plan in writing. Let's start with Kerala, where Chief Minister Pinarayi Vijayan has written to the Prime Minister asking that the centre not transfer the burden of compensation to states. Similar comments from West Bengal's Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee. She's also written to the Prime Minister calling the decision, and I quote, tantamount to a betrayal of trust. The Chief Ministers of Tamil Nadu, Delhi and Chhattisgarh have also spoken out against the centre's decision and have asked for the Prime Minister's intervention. On the other hand, Karnataka has become the first major industrial state to support the centre's plan. Chief Minister B.S. Yediyurappa wrote to the Prime Minister saying the state will borrow directly to bridge the shortfall in revenue. That is, of course, along expected lines. A quick check of some of the other headlines that we're tracking. The markets see a sharp recovery in the second half, closing at near-day highs. The Sensex added nearly 350 points, the Nifty more than 100 points from the lows of the day, gaining 0.5% each. The mid-cap index gained the most amongst trendline indices, closing 1.5% higher. In a bid to boost manufacturing, the Niti Aayog is likely to move the cabinet for umbrella policy combining the production-linked incentive scheme and the phased manufacturing program. Sources say Niti Aayog is likely to propose that line ministries work on specific measures for 9 different sectors under this umbrella policy. That's a cnbc TV 18 exclusive. Government limits the benefits under the merchandise export from India scheme at 2 crore rupees per exporter. Claims 98% of the companies won't be impacted. Bajaj Auto says the cap will hurt the company significantly. Facebook India chief Ajit Mohan appears before the parliamentary panel on information technology. The panel, headed by Congress leader Shashi Tharoor, had called representatives of Facebook to hear their views on prevention of misuse of social media platforms and safeguarding the rights of citizens. The Prime Minister's office has released the first audit report of the PM Cares Fund. The report shows that the fund, which was set up with an initial corpus of 2.25 lakh rupees, received over 3,000 crore rupees in contribution between the 27th and the 31st of March. However, the names of the donors have not been mentioned. Former Finance Minister and senior Congress leader P. Chidambaram questions the government, asks why the names of donors have not been revealed. With the monsoon session of Parliament slated to begin from the 14th of September, a notification issued by the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha Secretariat says that question hour will be suspended. The decision has come under fire from opposition members of Parliament. Rajya Sabha MP from the Trinamool Congress, Derek O'Brien, tweeted saying that the pandemic is being used by the government to murder democracy. He added that opposition MPs losing the right to question the government is a first since 1950. Congress MP Shashi Tharoor also weighing in with a tweet saying that questioning the government is the oxygen of parliamentary democracy, and this government is seeking to reduce Parliament to a notice board. DMK leader Kanimoi also tweeted her protest, saying even elected representatives have no right to question the government. Well, up next, Justice Arun Mishra's tenure at the Supreme Court draws to a close. He retires today. We take a look at some of his key judgments. That and more when we return. Power distribution companies owe generation and transmission companies over 2.6 lakh crore rupees as of June this year. Sources say Discoms are likely to seek 1.2 lakh crores in liquidity assistance. Anshu joins us now with more. Anshu, debt continues to be a big concern. Who are the main culprits? What's the plan of action?
The government sources have told CNBC TV18 that state Discoms dues at the end of June this year stood at 2.6 lakh crore rupees, which it owes to private as well as PSU and state power generating and transmission companies. Under the liquidity scheme, PFC-REC have sanctioned 68,000 crore rupees and disbursed about 24,000 crore rupees so far. It is expected that by the end of this year, liquidity requests from the state Discoms may reach 1.2 lakh crore rupees. As per government data, maximum Discom overdue are in states like Rajasthan, Tamil Nadu and Uttar Pradesh, amongst others. The government also feels that so far in FY20, the level of outstanding for Discoms have not increased compared to FY19, which stood at 2.2 lakh crore rupees in both financial years. Sources have also said that with disbursement of liquidity funds to Discoms, it is expected that losses of Discoms will come down to about 1.5 lakh crore rupees by the end of this year. Meanwhile, Power Ministry has also prepared reforms-linked incentive scheme for the states, which is likely to be sent for cabinet nod within 2 months' time. The idea is to plug Discom losses with incentive given central government only on the basis of reforms taken by the states on reducing both financial as well as technical losses in the power sector. The central government also plans to privatize union territories like Chandigarh, Andaman Nicobar, Dadra Nagar Haveli, Daman and Diu by the end of this financial year. Back to you.
Okay, Anshu, many thanks for joining us. Now, Justice Arun Mishra's tenure at the Supreme Court has drawn to a close. He retires as the third senior-most judge of the Apex Court. In his 6-year tenure, he's handled some of the most controversial cases. Ashwit Kumar looks back at some of them.
Justice Arun Mishra, he's clearly been one of the most talked about figures in the Indian higher judiciary. He's invited a fair bit of criticism. He's courted very many controversies, but he takes a bow today. He bows out. He retires today on the 2nd of September. Let's take a look at his tenure in the Supreme Court. Now, he's had about a 3-year-odd run as far as the Supreme Court is concerned. He authored about 130-odd judgments, was also a part of about 540 benches. So a vast experience is what he accumulated. But let's take a look at some of the cases that he'll be remembered for. Let's remind our viewers, we're looking at non-political cases that he handled, which in fact led to some degree of controversy. The first was allegations of corruption leveled against the former CJI, none other than the former CJI, Justice Deepak Mishra. Now, what's interesting is that at the time, Justice Chalameshwar had referred this case, seeking a probe to a larger bench of 5 judges. But the very next day, we found that Justice Arun Mishra was a part of another 5-judge bench. This time, it was flanking the Chief Justice himself, Justice Deepak Mishra. They quashed the order by Justice Chalameshwar, and also he was a part of the very bench that in fact quashed the proceedings, that had quashed the case that sought to probe the former CJI. The second key case also involves another CJI, this time Justice Ranjan Gogoi. He was facing allegations of sexual harassment. What's interesting is that Justice Ranjan Gogoi had called a special hearing of all days on a Saturday, where we found that Justice Arun Mishra again was a part of that bench, where Justice Gogoi pleaded his own innocence in a case where he himself was facing allegations of sexual harassment. Now, we also understand that Justice Arun Mishra also headed a bench which in fact was looking at allegations of corporate fixers coming in to disturb the functioning of the Supreme Court. That's not all. Another key case, we've been talking about this for the last couple of weeks, the AGR case. There have been a lot of comments coming in on what the implications of the judgment could be. He's recognized non-telecom revenues as a part of AGR, which resulted in a burden of 1.69 lakh crores on the Indian telecom industry. So again, a heated subject of debate there as well. The Adani Group, well, this has been another criticism that has been leveled against Justice Arun Mishra, particularly by certain members of the bar, such as Dushyant Dave. He's the Supreme Court Bar Association president. He argued that there is preferential treatment given to hearings of the Adani Group. So that is one interesting allegation being made by a senior member of the bar, Dushyant Dave. Let's take a look at the other key matters. One of them, of course, is Prashant Bhushan and the contempt case. We again have been covering that extensively. He was held guilty of contempt. He was fined with a 1 rupee fine. He was given that 1 rupee fine. But clearly, that has sparked a lot of debate on how that matter was handled by Justice Arun Mishra. In fact, Attorney General speaking today at the farewell ceremony of Justice Arun Mishra said that if he was in Justice Mishra's shoes, he would not have gone ahead and would not have punished Prashant Bhushan for contempt of court. So interesting comments coming in. But that's, of course, only the set of non-political matters. He quoted a fair bit of controversies in political matters as well. The Sahara Birla controversies, Judge Loya case, Sanjeev Bhatt case, prevention of atrocities against SC/ST, Hareen Pandya case. So he's had his fair share of political as well as non-political controversial cases, if one could call it that. But outside the courtroom is also where he, in fact, attracted some attention. He, in fact, remarked earlier this year, where he referred to the Prime Minister as an internationally acclaimed visionary, said that he's a versatile genius who thinks globally but acts locally, which invited criticism because being a member of the Supreme Court, the Indian High Judiciary, he should be seen to be maintaining an arm's distance from the executive, from the decision makers. So clearly a colourful figure as we look back at the tenure of Justice Arun Mishra.
Well, certainly a legacy that will be remembered for a while. Thanks very much, Ashmit, for that. With that, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of India Business Hour. From all of us here, many thanks for watching. Do stay tuned. The news continues.